Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me.
You have a grand unification theory of all magic. Please explain.
Yeah, it's probably not, my idea. I'm sure many smart people have come to the same conclusion, but it gradually dawned on me that I was trying to sort of disentangle or perhaps merge, the artistic process and the magical process and, blah, blah. It's very interesting, but it's not really new. However, I wouldn't say obsessed with it, but I was very genuinely interested in it to check out what's going on by looking at art, by looking at magic, and seeing mostly similarities. And that made me think further and sort of deeper and going back in time a little bit, or quite a bit, to what's called the beginning of time, or the beginning of our recordings, or the beginning of our perception in a way. And the way it seems to be based on remnants, like early art, for instance, and development of tools and just tribal life. Also, in the sense that the indigenous cultures that still exist in their almost pristine form are like living memories of ancient times. And basically what was going on is that one key element of survival and a healthy life for the little community or tribe or whatever we're looking at was this thing with the function of going beyond, of transcending the normal mind frame, usually delegated to one person who had good capacity for leaving the body, going on this sort of trips, inner journeys, vision quests, can call it whatever we want with today's terminology, but basically transcending the rational and going into spheres of the deep psyche or outer nature. You can again call it what you want, but bringing back real firsthand knowledge about what was good, what was bad, what, for instance, you could eat, you could not eat, in terms of weather. Of course, also a learning process, working together with outer nature. So we could say that this person or this function also very much was like an interpreter, explorer, interpreter, and together people integrated this knowledge that came from not the direct senses, not their own sensory input, but through someone who had as a job to go through these things. And then you keep, thinking, what happened along the way? Did those people disappear? Do they only exist in these indigenous cultures in forgotten jungles that will now soon be defunct? And of course, no. That has existed, and it still exists, only in slightly different forms. You could say, these schematic, almost cliched things that eventually, when societies became too complex, we had these proxy institutions where you had a priest and you had a church, or you had an artist who worked with art, where you had a scientist who took on that sort of the natural scientific aspects. And that's just a natural progression too. However, the inherent need of having that function either in yourself or a designated proxy person, or an actual person, I mean, has traveled on in our genes. That's my theory. Might be someone else's too. But genetically, we have memories of many things that have helped us survive. There's no, doubt about that. And as general science also affirms that it's like a little memory bank, and our instincts and everything are not static. They weren't static. They have developed along the millennia and even longer. And this thing of going beyond to secure information about basically survival and development, it's right in there together with fight or flight or procreation and these things. So that's something that I present in source magic as that is the source. And specifically, it has been interesting talking about these things, thinking about them, talking about them together with so-called occult people. A lot of occultists are not as open-minded as one could assume or hope. They're actually very rigid in their thinking, very devoted, almost religious to their system, to their power structure, to their initiations. And basically, there's nothing wrong with that. I guess that's how most people function. But this thing where you impose an interpretation grid or an interpretation matrix on top of something to see what's what, then people, freak out and say, I'm not a shaman. I'm not interested in shamanism, just pretending that any kind of ism can be weighed against another ism. But what I call, I'm not so interested in shamanism in itself, but the shamanic approach. It is the best word that we can use because it has these indigenous connotations. And it is really the function of the shaman is to go beyond and come back with information and also heal and do things in the beyond, in their minds or wherever they go. So that for me is a short summing up of the source magic. We all have the very easy connection to the source. It's just you don't even have to go out in nature with sleeping bags or designer drugs or anything. It's just to validate whatever you experience on the inner planes in your own imagination, and then you take it one step further and travel through your imagination and just accept what you find as really important stuff, not to be discarded as some whimsical, fantasy. Fantasy is a very, very difficult word. And I think that that's really it. And then, of course, going out into nature and connecting with nature, because in this mind frame and in this premise or thesis or whatever you want to call it, lies also the fact that it's a holistic thing. We are absolutely connected to each other for good or bad. As much as we hate a lot of people, we are little, cells on this huge body of this globe floating in space, whether we want it or not. So I think that's very important to connect to that real realization. A real shocking insight, not an intellectual thing, reading Carl's book and saying, oh yeah, that's it, but actually be shook, encounter that insight inside yourself, and preferably, I would say, somewhere in nature. It could be a desert or a jungle, doesn't matter, but preferably somewhere where you can be alone and undisturbed and just connect. It's about connecting to the source. And when you do that, which is a lot simpler than people think, start looking at things in a different way. At least I did. And for me, it was not a one-point experience that, shook my life. I think this has been a gradual progression, also doing a lot of occult work in different environments and seeing what's worked for me and seeing what's not worked for me. And it's this standard, acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It's one of the best.
I thought that stood for Knights in Satan's Service.
Oh, it does too, but that's only for initiates.
Yes.
but basically people have a tendency, especially in the West, to make things a whole lot more complicated than they need to be. And that's another thing I present in the book, it's the word called sympathesis. People talk about sympathetic magic. That's, when something becomes symbolic of something else and you affect the symbol, and then that will affect the outer so-called reality. But with the word sympathesis, I mean that individual human beings or cultures or societies or religions, they create their own system to transcend. Because I do believe inherently that the human individual psyche, the totality, has a need to transcend itself. Those are the peak moments. We all know the orgasm or spiritual enlightenment, those kind of things. We need to have those experiences, and so if we are very laid back. Let's say if we are Southern Asian Buddhists, we are already working in a tradition that has been created for that mind frame, which is meditative. It may seem to be passive, but it's not really. It's a whole lot of work inside. Whereas in the Western ceremonial tradition of occultism, you have the Judeo-Christian rational scientific mind going berserk, basically creating so much systematic approaches that it takes a lifetime to break down and transcend. So I believe that we all create. It's not escapism. It's not a flight. It's something that we build in order to transcend. I guess you could tie it in with Nietzsche's overcoming, in a way, not only the bare existential minimum, but also overcoming your own structure that you build in order to get to that peak moment and look beyond, if but temporarily, and then come back with that added information.
Yeah, that's I love that, and I think that one of the things about the shaman's quest that is often missed is that you do have to come back, and that really that's the most important part, because you can spend decades out on a limb chasing all the most extreme experiences, doing all the drugs, going off the berserk as you pointed out. But for me, the key realization of the whole thing is because as we all know, when you go out into that other world, it's infinite. It's like a trip that just never stops. There's always something more. And it can be very dark and harrowing at times, and in a lot of ways. But it's kind of an endless. Sometimes it feels like an endless Maya or an additional video game layer to reality, kind of going out into the occult experience. But for me, the key is, well, what are you going to bring back for the tribe? And I think that's what makes somebody a shaman, rather than they did 18,000 hits of DMT at a festival. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also there is something to be said for I guess it's the time we're in. I'm thinking of individualism, and it has been promoted through definitely through Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, basically the philosophy of will. It ties in with individualism. And then you have, in the more occult specifics, you have Crowley, of course, and LaVeyan Satanism, Topi. It's kind of an ultra individualism, and that is not a paradox, because it's also a cliche. But you can't really be good to someone else until you're good to yourself, and you have to find out all these answers that you can find out for yourself first. And that, again, to take another example of the necessity why these things are coming to us right now or during the 20th century, I'm thinking about psychology. It was another matrix, something else that opens up the inner spheres that had previously been just merely, pathologizing people in a very simplified way. But with psychoanalysis and many other kind of forms of therapy, you could really open yourself up. It was not someone, to quote Pinchbeck, breaking open your head. It was you yourself on the couch or wherever you're doing this thing, opening up to actually a stranger, because that you need to feel the trust. But the main thing is that you do it because essentially you're doing it to yourself. You're opening up to yourself. So psychology is another interesting thing that happened during this let's call it first century of the new eon, then, to just keep it in the occult history or tradition. So I think that all of these things point to that collective movements, and we can see that on a daily basis, they don't really work that well. Because I think we touched upon that last time, or if not, we're doing it now again. This thing where power in itself corrupts. And when you have big blobs of societies with too many people, then the temptation to cling to the whatever power you have and also to expand it is simply too attractive, alluring, and that's what's going on, and that eventually leads to wars and mass murder and other forms of behaviors that we really should be intelligent enough to not delve into. But unfortunately, that seems to be the case. So I think that's why this is like bouncing back, or with the pendulum swinging. We're now in the movement towards more individualism, and it's not a paradox. Again, I was talking about holistic approaches or holistic insight, but we cannot be a good part if we're not a good part, And how do you get to be a good part? Well, you have the classic, rights of uses thing, know thyself. You have to know thyself, and that's those two words. Basically, they say it all. So life, I think, is an individuation in ideal circumstances, of course, that you can be aware that you need to individuate, develop, empower yourself, and then, of course, that you have that you acquire the means to do it, meaning that you take it seriously. Because there are so many people, like for instance in the psychedelic environments, they have fantastic insights. And they have absolutely mind-blowing insights about how everything functions and your own part in it. But then when the trip is over and you wake up in the afternoon, then, it's like gone with the wind. You can say that it was a great trip, but what the hell happened? And then you look at your notes from the night and it's complete gobbledygook, So you have to you have to validate things as they happen in the moment, and then they will stick longer, and then they can be sorted in your mental filing system, and eventually you can connect the dots in your individuation process. And there is no outcome of that. There's no finishing line. But when you're on your path, then you will become simply a better person that can integrate and interact with other people in a collective. It doesn't really work the other way around. A collective seemingly cannot empower the individual to become individuated, because that's a paradox, because the collective requires that everyone is just a kind of a mechanical cog.
Right. The collective, it's not in the collective's interest to empower an individual unless it's into a functionary role.
Yeah, because if the cog becomes a little ball or a little screw instead, it can jam the system.
But I think that said, learning how to get power within a group is very important, and understanding that it's not a process of force, but I'm thinking more of like in a corporate environment where it's you have to be competent and market your competency to your fellow collective in just the right way, so that they entrust you with power, similar to, I guess, what you were saying about the therapist, that it's invested in somebody by another person in that way. It's always fascinated me. I think that what you're describing, you've started from talking about the shamanic experience, and I realize we should super specify. This is from the book Source Magic, which is now out by Carl on Amazon.
Yeah.
Just in case for the people who are listening to the audio only, I realize I only held up the book, so I wanted to specify. Yeah. And this is now the second podcast on it, because it's an awesome book. Kind of what you're and this is a conclusion that I've come to in my own way as well, that the pattern described by the shamanic experience is really just a pattern of individuation or becoming an adult. It doesn't have to necessarily have anything to do with like the more colorful aspects of magic, although it certainly can. That stuff is fun, right? But it's also struck me that the shaman pattern of going out into the wilderness and then coming back with something for your tribe is the same as the hero's journey. The plot of the hero that goes out, conquers the dragon, and then comes back at the end. And so it really does, I think, to your point, I mean, it really does seem to be hardwired into us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, also, you wrote a book about John Dee, and let's stay with him and that era or their work for a bit, because it's basically the same in a more pristine way, I think, than what the Golden Dawn tried to emulate in a way. They did it fairly well, and it was certainly carried impact. But there you had these sort of experimental magicians in medieval times who also went out on a limb and jumped off, and experienced a whole lot of crazy stuff. But they needed to contextualize it, first of all, for safety, because they couldn't be too crazy and or too overt about what they were doing. They had the patronage of royalty, but there were other enemies also who did not like what they were doing. However, if you look at the basic shamanic things, like you travel on a rhythm, you travel on frequencies, you travel on tones, because that's a traditional way that everybody who tries it, they find out that it works really well. However, these guys, they were working with more magical things like frequency that comes from intonation and invocation and evocation, using sounds, and I'm sure incense and the scrying and all basic techniques. But it's the same, right? They went into a different space, let's call it different headspace, and they experienced things that were not the ordinary. They experienced things that were out of the ordinary. However, their context allowed them in this moment to receive information, and a whole lot of it, and then you could say the classic conundrum: is it objective or is it subjective? Are the angels there, or is it the psyche of these overheated British gentlemen? And I've certainly swung between both. Right now, I think I'm in a very, very, very psychological thing. I think we connect to our own psyche, basically, and we are beings. We are connected to nature. Therefore, we can go into nature by ourselves, by our psyches in a way, and find incredible things there. But if you want to, you could also say that, the totem animal is real. The angels are real. Any kind of, Judeo-Christian hierarchies of heaven are real. It's all real. Or everything is just psychic forces that get a culturally imprinted form or gestalt through the names. Of that, we can never be sure. We can speculate, and we gladly do. But this thing is not really that different. It's the same. And the Golden Dawn, they rehashed it, and Crowley rehashed it. It's the same thing. Chaos magicians were very good in that they really, and Topi also, it's a process of upheaval, saying, let's change, let's have a different kind of pantheon. Let's call it, this and that, and bolt this and screw this and glass this, and just be completely anarchic in a way. And as they say, whatever floats the boat, whatever works. And I think at that point in time, there was need of shaking things up culturally, because it has, it's almost like inert and very depressed if we're talking about these specific societies of, Germany and Britain and America also. So I believe that we inherently need to go beyond. Hence, ergo, why people go to bars and drink. It's not an enlightening thing, but people still have a need to do it. Or they smoke a joint, or they go on heavier psychedelic trips. And just like it's not recreational. It's an inherent need that we have to go into that different mind frame. Unfortunately, it becomes a recreational, commodity. It becomes a business, both legal and illegal. But it is so big simply because the need is so big. If we don't do it, then someone else will do it for us, because we will eventually, yearn for it so much that we cannot not do it.
One thing that I've thought about a lot and talked about a lot is that when the Soviet Union fell, there was a tremendous explosion of interest in occultism, and I thought about that a lot. And this was part of my business plan, actually, in the sense that when things are falling apart, and this was at this point post 2008, when the empire is crumbling, as it seems to be, although it always seems to be crumbling, people, I think, have an inherent need to not just to engage in this process, not just to engage in the will to power, but also to contact something that feels safe and like a structure beyond the structures of government. And so I think that a lot of what people are doing when they're going out into the other worlds is not necessarily, at least maybe not after the initial part, to go crazy and see how much insane stuff can be discovered, but is looking for some reassuring deep structure. Because we're at this point, it's like God is dead. It's on us to figure it out, whether we want to or not, in our current social moment. And that's, I think, very deeply stressful for people to have the burden of the shaman. I feel actually people should not all have the burden of the shaman, as we all now do, which is why I think these things are so popular. People, I think, are very deeply, I wouldn't be, but I think a lot of people are deeply, and probably most of the people listening to this podcast would not be, but most people are much more comfortable with received truth. They don't need the extra burden of having, they have kids to feed and jobs and things like that.
No, absolutely. And I think that from the very beginning, it was a very specified, special occupation. Because there were also occupational hazards. It's like, tangibly touching on madness.
There should be insurance packages for shopping.
But not was simply perceived as madness because they acted crazy or act crazy from the point of view of normality, so called. But actually going into states of mind that border on psychosis, meaning you actually let go. It's not like a light trance where you enjoy it, and then you actually go beyond. And the skill of the shaman is to know how to actually leave it and come back. Whereas normal humans who are psychotic, they have a hard time coming back. They get stuck there. And I think on a lighter way of looking at it, or on a lighter scale, I think that can be true for a lot of things in contemporary occultism also. What's being offered is that people don't become psychotic necessarily, but they become obsessed. I don't say possessed, because I don't really ascribe so much power to that concept, but they're certainly obsessed with whatever it is. People tend to go into things head on, and as they say now from poker, all in. They it's a religious thing, right?
Yeah.
You become a fundamentalist, even though you might be interested, actually, even in chaos magic, you become defensive of Pete Carroll and Phil Hine, and you become defensive. So it's another way.
I'm not, but yeah.
But I can see it even in those environments.
They were defensive against me though. When my first book came out, Peter Carroll said, he wrote this scathing thing where he said, it's an amazing it's like, he basically said that he had cast his pearls before swine meaning me, and that what a mess people have made out of his ideas. And I love this. Actually, I was actually really happy about this. He said, "This isn't enlightenment; it's permanent derangement." I was like, awesome, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's just I can see it also. I still am a Thelemite, but I'm no longer involved in the OTO. I was for a long time, and I had a problem with fundamentalism of a very religious nature, and that's where I just had to draw the line. People are allowed to do whatever they want to. I don't care, but I did not want to be associated with that kind of religiousness, because for me, it was always about the philosophy. I already had my magical system from Topi, and it's been with me up until now, and there's some good parts in Crowley, the syncretism, the synthesizing. He was a great, colorful character. But the main thing for me was that he brought the philosophy of will into the occult. Some others had tried, but he was certainly the best and most powerful one. But it is basically boils down to Schopenhauer and then Nietzsche as the real, Thor hammering down on God. And then you have Crowley coming in, that like the occult guy, and sort of do what thou wilt. And he absolutely, and that is the benefit. It's the philosophy. The philosophy is the liberator. It's not the magical system in itself. And it's certainly not Crowley's psychosis of being a prophet. I would say that religiousness, or I don't know, maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was like tongue in cheek. I don't know.
If it's a joke, I think you started taking it seriously, as happens.
Exactly, because that's what happens. That's the so-called Christ complex that comes in, and you want to be a prophet, and then the I won't say adepts, the acolytes take that seriously, and then you have a religiousness that simply becomes fundamentalist, and then. If you're doing that, how can you be a fully individuated person? How can you
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just for me, there is a paradox there that I had problems with, and I had to dissociate myself from that environment.
I was I'm super interested about this. In the very, very few number of times that I went to go hang out with Otto, I was very surprised that I was actually really shocked in this deep way after coming out of chaos magic for so long, and Jen and the basic chaos magic perception of the world, which is still my fundamental ground of this is essentially a way of meta thinking. It's an art project. It's a self-individuation as art project, and all these basic these grounds of basic sanity of this isn't necessarily real, but it's fun. Like, I think that's a great way to come at it. And then I'm like at the Otto, and I'm basically interacting in America. It's like interacting with people who used to be Mormons, and they believed that angelic book from Joseph Smith, and now they're renegade Mormons, and now they're Thelemites, and now they believe the Book of the Law, just like they believed in the tablets of Moroni, the angel. That was what I just didn't know where to go with that. I was like, it's like we're not even in the same universe. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to say that as an elitist thing at all. It's just I'm literally trying to say it's like I wasn't prepared for that. It was really disturbing to me when I encountered that, and I didn't really know how to have that conversation.
No, I hear you loud and clear, and I think that maybe that's also an inherent human need. Then that in our specific culture, in our specific time, the contemporary takes on that form. Like, we have so many paths and avenues and freedoms, and including philosophies and self-help books and magic books and podcasts. It's fucking endless. We are so free that it could almost be hampering. So perhaps again, when someone finds something slightly resonant with them and their outlook, they become zealots. They become so protective, or whatever it is that brings that initial resonance and inspiration. And it's who are we to judge? If it whatever floats the boat, if people are happy there, then it's fine. However, from the outside,
that's not my way of thinking. That it's just like we have to at least be one level of meta, at least one level of distance is comfortable for me. But maybe that's my hang up. I can't fully jump in,
Yeah, no, maybe. But I think that what I've seen is that, as you say, with Mormons or whatever, Christian Science, it could be anything. It's the same mechanics, right? People just want to, find the others, find a community. It's beautiful and it's absolutely natural. But I think it's also so natural that you don't want to leave it when you found it. So thereby you can act in ways that were sort of that you could never see yourself acting in that way only 6 months earlier. You change when you come into the environment, and I'm not implying like cult psychology. I think it's more basic than that. People just want to belong to something, and groups promoting in strict and severe individualism should perhaps refrain from just adopting other like churches terminology
Yeah.
and phrases and stuff like that, because it's just too interchangeable, and it defeats the purpose to me, you know.
Right. I'm curious to go back to the talking about the philosophy at this point in your life. How do you define will? Because for me, that has changed quite a bit, you know, from my initial thinking on it.
I think that it's a very difficult question, but and I can only speak for myself. I think what's happened in my life is that in the beginning, I saw everything very, very compartmentalized, and I think magic it helped me in that, for good and bad. Seeing now I do this ritual for this specific purpose. You know, it's like a very causal approach. You know, I want B to happen, therefore I do A, and you know, move over there. It worked, and it has worked really well. But mainly, I think when you have done enough so that a synergy is manifested in between these little mini trips of causality, displaying your garden of flowers, which could be like artistic projects or you know, any kind of manifestations that you work for magically. But now I see will more as I don't know. These are difficult and cliche terms, but very much more like a flow. I know that all the little tiny details that need causal attention, they are now, because of I am no longer tiny Carl, I'm now big Carl, and they move by themselves in a way. Not automatic, they need pushing or greasing, you know, greasing the machinery, but the machinery works really well. So in terms, when I think about will and of course, what is my will, then I would say they're basically where it used to be little, you know, semi-automatic shooting, like today it's more like one cannon, you know, one big cannon.
That's great.
That I focus on is like a boom, and then I just sit like Baron Munchausen on the ball, you know, and all the little causalities are sort of the tail in a way.
That's great.
So I think that's how I look at it. It's I still want the same things, but many of the things don't even need to be formulated, because they are part of the main thing that's moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like, and that's great. As you're talking about this, and that's great that you have one canon. I'm still like, it's like this lifelong process of trying to like get everything in one stream for me, you know, instead of going in separate directions at the same time, which is the real magician's downfall, is trying to do too much at once, I think.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have two ways of thinking about will. One is at least the act of will. I came to realize that for me, this was very helpful. You know, when you come at this from the magical perspective and you do like this kind of Sturm und Drang, like capital W will, it is my will that this so-and-so, you know, I get a date on the so-and-so date. I think that that is kind of overdoing it at this point. For me, a will at this point just means a decision, you know, to make a decision, and therefore to cut off other options, to make a real life decision. And that's what and it's interesting now too with psychology. We know now that will is a finite resource. Like you have it more in the early morning, and you lose willpower as time goes on. There's only a certain number of decisions you can make a day, which is why people like Obama or Steve Jobs or you know, wore the same clothing every day, so they didn't have to expend that decision. Yeah. Which is really interesting for me when compared to the thelemic idea of, you know, this kind of like bodybuilder approach to will, that you constantly have to keep building it up, which I think is good too. But for me, it can be simpler. It can be the decision, simply making a decision in the moment rather than a whole ritual.
Yeah.
And the other operative definition of will for me at this point just seems to be like, you know, like I think kind of what you were saying, which is just like the course of how my life is being lived as a directional stream. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe you can look at it even in the temporality. When you said that, had this idea that maybe it's not so much about projecting into the future. Maybe will is what we've achieved so far. That if nothing else, we are in this present moment the result of our will so far. So if we want to look at what will is, then we should perhaps look backwards. Do the diary thing and analysis thing of what has gone well and what has not gone well, because we don't know anything about our will of the future. It's all speculation. We don't really know. We can have a tangent. You can have a certain kind of trampoline that you're jumping on, and hopefully you land in the pool that you want to land in. But if you jump really high on the trampoline, you might end up on the side by the pool.
Interesting.
We can't know. The only thing we know is that we're on the trampoline.
Well, thinking retroactively too, I mean, there definitely does seem to be a process of, okay, when I try to do certain things with my life, even that I'm putting a ton of willpower in, but those just never work out. But then even if I exert a tiny amount of willpower over here, it like works out perfectly. And then you kind of see that pattern over time. And it's like, okay, well, clearly maybe I'm just quote unquote meant to be doing this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something where people have to take that seriously. And it can be a challenge for a lot of people who are, perhaps comfortable in life, but they feel attracted to something else, deeply attracted to something else. And they find that when they deviate and go in that direction, they get so many synchronicities, for instance. Synchronicities, for me, it's the actual proof that we give to ourselves saying, you're on the right track, keep going. Because it's so, what can we call it? Existentially connecting the dots, perhaps, in a funny way. It's like these wow moments that synchronicities are. They rarely come to us when we are completely bored at some, again, like some corporate job setting, or in a complete dud of a family situation, when we're frustrated and in the wrong place. We rarely have synchronicities then. They come when we're sort of filled with the joie de vivre, the joy of life, and we feel meaning. Meaning is a quintessential word. Then synchronicities come. And it's really a joy to be in that kind of vortex where things are going well. And it's never someone else doing that for you. And if they are, you'll be sure to find out someday that they have ulterior motives. They want something back on their, friendly investment. But when you go in that direction, whether it's will-based or intuitively or wherever, and you find that, whoa, I just met this person. I wouldn't have met that person if I had stayed at work that day, and these things that are so basic. And I think that people have to take synchronicities seriously, because I find them completely integrated, not like little rewards. They are meaningful. And that's one of the definitions, like random things happening that acquire meaning in our interpretation of them. But I think it's more than that. It's also an immediate emotional thing. We don't always have to interpret everything to find meaning. It can feel meaningful.
That's a really important point.
Oh, absolutely. You meet someone on the corner that you haven't met in a long time, and that person reminds you of who you really need to be. And you're filled in the moment with the potential of, that person perhaps symbolizes that thing or reminds you of that you should be doing that. So it's not only, oh, I should be doing this. It's an immediate emotional impact that gives you a feeling that I should really be doing this, because that's where I feel meaning.
I like that. I mean, I sometimes call that feeling like I'm in the slipstream of I guess in more corporate language, you could say in a flow state. But I also, in my life, you can lean way too far into synchronicities as well, into starting to think that they are like commands or literal. And I think pointing out that it's more about the feeling that you get. I remember, just like even in my early 20s, like just making decisions because a synchronicity was involved. And it's like the complete wrong decision. It's like, no, you're not supposed to literally make decisions necessarily based on coincidences that occur. That's probably taking it too far.
Yeah,
it could be very
I think it's good as little reminders in the moment that you feel something that is different from what you felt when you were not moving in that direction. And I guess maybe you can actually look at it as a little reward, but as a command, no.
Yeah, but I think an indication that you're on the right track.
Yes.
But not as an ultimate meaning or anything like that. That I think is where the slip is.
Yeah.
Or at least it has been for me. I've made some extremely stupid life decisions that way. Mm-hmm. I wanted to, in reading this book, this is slightly on a tangent, but I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about magic now post-COVID? As opposed to 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even going to say, because we could talk about culture wide, because I think that has changed. But I'm wondering if your thinking or your lived experience of magic has changed at all. Because I didn't even really have that thought till a few days ago. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think... and there are many levels or layers one could approach it from. One could be from a very, let's call it egoic level. What's it like for me? Well, my life situation in general changed because of COVID, because it became a trigger to move out of Stockholm. We wanted to do that anyway, but it became a trigger of having first been isolated for a year, or this self-isolation, and so many things happening and people actually dying from it. And, it creates a negative impact, of course. So I'm very Saturnian. I'm a Capricorn. I'm very slow, very set in my ways. I'd lived in the same apartment in Stockholm for 28 years. So it was time to move. Wow. And so basically that thing helped. So in hindsight, it was a good thing because it triggered this thing that made us move to a much better space. That has allowed me to become much more creative. So as for magic in itself, it's just tagged along. It's completely integrated. I work much better, more intuitively, magically, and by that I mean like ritually, and in my meditations I'm allowing myself to bloom in a different way here that I couldn't do in this sort of tiny space in Stockholm where we felt isolated in many ways. So in that sense, but that's just like, again, a causal thing. I don't like this, so let's change this. That could have happened because of other reasons too, not specifically COVID. But in this case, it was the COVID thing and the self-isolation. On a larger cultural scale, I think the enemy that you cannot see is always the trickiest one, because it's like totally demonic in a sense. You demonize something that you can't see, and that's the reason why, in warfare, it's easy to point the finger and say, that's the enemy, let's go get them. And in this case, I think what happened, I may be wrong, but I think what happened was that all the statistics peaked so much in the beginning because of the fact that the statistics came from the deaths of many frail people, like older people, infirm people. And of course, then they are dropping like flies and it's hyper tragic. But all you see is that, oh, Sweden has the highest death rate per capita in this thing. What are they doing? But what happened was basically it hit so hard in the beginning, and that sent traumatic shockwaves, not only for the people who lost people, relatives and stuff, but also in this, demagogic exploitation of statistics in a way. So that was one thing that affected at least Sweden, and I think the Western world in general, in a negative way. It became something very dangerous very quickly, and that, of course, led to this self-isolation, because in hindsight, we can only speculate, perhaps it would have been better if the sort of healthier, more upstanding people in general, maybe it would have been better for the entire culture if everyone had been exposed to COVID, and create faster this thing that's usually called herd immunity. Where it's no longer spiking, but it's flat or decreasing. However, with that approach, it would have been very provocative when you do have infirm people, like old people, elderly people's homes and stuff like that were so they got it bad. And I think it was the same in America also. I think actually more than 1 million people died in the US, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a lot. And I lost several friends. So for me, it was never, and they were all anti-vaxxers, I should add. So for me,
interesting.
For me, there is a connection. I got the vaccines, and I have not felt anything sort of negative coming from that, and I haven't seen it either in other people. I think so. The impact has mainly been on having had a collective trauma, statistics, actual personal connections with someone who died, firsthand or secondhand, I don't know. This thing that it was real, it was a real threat. And also the friends I had who died, they were sort of gung-ho, no, it's not, there's nothing,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Were they younger people?
No, they were my age, and I wouldn't say absolutely not infirm. Perhaps a little bit adventurous, but in general, I would say that they were very strong people. Yeah.
So
I think
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, no, and it's horrible. But I mean, it's also because everyone has this thing where should we trust Big Brother? Should we trust the medical corporations, big pharma, who's making the money here? Well, they are, etc., etc. But on the other hand, you can only go back to my own childhood. I was born in 1966. There were still occasional cases of polio at that time, but because of the massive vaccination against polio, it was, I would say, obliterated. I think it's gone, at least in that part of the world, and smallpox, chickenpox, whatever you get when you're a kid. I've never had those diseases because I got the vaccines. So in my safe Swedish brain of causality, I have trusted Big Brother because we've never had any kind of corrupt governments or scandals in that case or big.
That must be nice.
Oh,
it's the opposite here.
Yeah, I know. Let me tell you, it's so nice.
I can't even imagine what that must be like here.
Yeah,
it's just all money.
I know. I mean, I have an American wife, and the thing is that I've heard so many things that. Why do people accept that? Why do people accept so much craziness?
Because that's a much longer conversation.
Yeah.
No, there was so much during COVID. I mean, that's an understatement of the millennium. There was so much happened during COVID, but I was thinking about, in a way, it was a forced. I don't know about shamanic, but certainly a forced confrontation with the inner world for everyone by force, by the government, because everyone had to be, at least in theory, those who were, isolated, often for very, very long periods of time, uncomfortably long and too long, but certainly isolation produces the shamanic experience.
Exactly.
And one of the things we saw coming out of that, and that I had to be very careful with, I really had to be careful with my own navigation of that, because it's so easy to just exactly what you said, when you can't see the enemy, it's like, well, what's really going on? Like, and you're not leaving your house. It's like, what's happening with the virus? What's happening with totalitarianism? There's all these things, but you can't see them other than through your phone, which is, always distorted, to say the least, or completely fictional. So, and then it's kind of like, well, you would in that, traditionally in that space, you would look to your tribe for information, and then but everyone else, in theory, maybe is in the same situation, or everyone's on different pages, or you don't even know who you can trust. I mean, in terms of such extreme opinions about so many things during this time. And
exactly.
and what can you do? You can go online and talk to people. Well, that's not going to really get you very far.
No.
And it was just a cultural psychosis in addition to the literal pandemic. I mean, what a horrible time for so many people.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely. But I think that if we return to the source magic main theory, I think that doesn't matter where the virus came from, whether it was like in a conspiratorial mind frame, it was manufactured in a lab, it was China, no, it was America, it was, those things will always pop up because that's the nature of I don't know, some people at least, and they have great amplification potential through the internet, as we know. However, it doesn't matter. Let's just accept the fact that, okay, there is something called COVID-19. It spiked, it toured the world, it brought a lot of people to literally to the grave. However, that should be another great wake-up call to just get our fucking shit together.
Yeah.
And I have to say that, we are lucky because what happened after the First World War, and then amplified by the second, was this thing that, there needs to be a unified global communication. And one of those things that I'm not only talking about the UN, but you also have the WHO, the World Health Organization, that monitors all of these little, Ebola flashes here, COVID there, and can communicate in real time with other regions and with, infrastructure of flight and other means of travel. And it's a pretty amazing thing, because if that didn't exist, then I think that the negative power, the lethal power of many of these things would be massive. If there weren't like impositions happening, we've had it something that the bird flu and then COVID and Ebola for a while there in Africa at least. And, these things, if no one controls them, then it will travel to everyone around the world.
And this, I think, will just keep, we're probably, knock on wood, hopefully not, but I think, we're going to be back in this situation at some point, because that's just the nature of the world. There's the nature of an exploding population that's, everyone is traveling constantly all over the world. And, nobody's separate anymore, Even also, when you think about airport flows, it's like we're not separate from each other at all.
No. And isn't it interesting also that it's not an enemy that is ever defeated, because viruses want to survive too. So they mutate. So it's just like, we come up with one vaccine that's good for now, but the COVID, I'm sure, will mutate into whatever it is, then COVID 2021, or let's wait for COVID 23. That would be nice. That will probably be the killer.
I hope not, but but I mean, it was for me. It's like, it's interesting. I do wonder how Jen would have reacted to this period in terms of talking about control and so forth. Although Jen was also, I think people may not realize, hopefully more after reading her books, but Jen was so scientifically minded, and actually like fascinated with things like bacteria and viruses and this type of thing. So I wonder how Jen would have reacted to this period. But for me, it's just like, look, everyone was kind of in a black and white thing of, the government's doing this or it's not, or you have to trust the government. It's like, for me, it's like, I'm so relentlessly dark that it's just like, look, everything bad can be happening all at once. Like there can be a totalitarian government and a horrible disease, and like this can all be happening all at once. So you got to hedge your bets here.
Yeah. And then what happens when it sort of seems to be fizzling out? Then Russia attack Ukraine. This is kind of these insane negative scenarios that it's almost like someone scripted it. And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial way, but it's so absurd how things.
Right. I think the first week of COVID, I sat down, and during that time I was not sleeping hardly at all, because there's so much going on and moving and trying to get away from it and trying to get ahead of the wave. It's just like insane. It's such an insane and horrible period. But I think I sat down right at the beginning and I just kind of did a brain download and said, okay, what's going to happen? And I kind of like plotted out the contingencies and the probabilities of what was going to happen. It was just kind of like, okay, supply chain breakdown, that happened. Mass rioting, that happened. An attempt to overthrow the government in the US, that happened. That was surprised that actually happened, and exactly when I predicted it. And the next one was, potential global supply chain shutdown and global war. That thankfully did not happen, but it did happen in Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. So I think when you say like this needs to be a wake up call to get our shit together, it's like, yeah. And I mean, I think one of the scariest things, and I guess we're getting a bit off track here, but one of the scariest things about this whole experience was how little people were prepared for it. I mean, in the US, Donald Trump just dismantled a lot of the infrastructure that was there that could have handled it, so there's a bad actor at work, and that affects the planet. But also just, I think we saw just people's psychological reactions under stress. I mean, it was, I'm glad to have had so much magical experience, because I think on one of our earlier podcasts we talked about, if you have some magical understanding, then you can deal with a post-truth world, whereas most people can't. But also this, and I think, some of the clearest lessons of COVID is like like making decisions. You saw. Maybe you saw, I definitely saw, when all this started, when people started realizing this was real, a lot of people just froze and they didn't know what to do, which is a very human thing. And so you saw that, or people saying like, no, I'm going to make a decision by will to do XYZ. Like, for instance, to move out of Stockholm, I moved out of Los Angeles for the same reasons. And not everyone has the means to do that, but whether it's that or how you certainly have to make a decision of about vaccination. You have to make a decision about whether you're going to wear a mask, who you're going to associate with. It was a real stress test of human everything. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I was asking if your perspective on magic has changed, because I feel that it's a situation that forced everyone to wake up, hopefully long enough to manage that wartime-like situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me personally, again, for me, it was good. It was good in the sense that it made me more aware, like on a meta level, because there's always the danger for everyone to become not necessarily inert, but, a little bit complacent, the comfort zone, and keep doing what you're doing because you sort of know it works. And but you need to shake things up. And sometimes you are too set in your ways to allow yourself to shake yourself up. Then when outer things like this happen of a real magnitude, real threat, real, magnitude, then you have to react to it. You can't just, dismiss it. And every human being is essentially a social animal. We need to go to the store. We need to do these things. It entails contact with other people. And that, I think, was something that allowed me, or in a way forced me, to change my perspective and say, can I do things differently, even in my hocus pocus stuff or in my creative work? And absolutely. And they have all gelled into a situation that is much better now. And for us also, I think it was I wouldn't say funny, but it was certainly interesting and a bit absurd, as things tend to be, when we felt that, well, now it seems to be over. When I'm talking about last summer, the summer of 2022, and we had been in our new place for a little bit more than a year and settled in and got into our groove, and we just said, oh, so we've been invited to this beautiful wedding in France. We hadn't traveled a bit, not hardly in Sweden even, and so okay, so let's go to this thing. It seems to be over, and we had both, vaccines, no COVID, nothing. But as soon as we left, as soon as we got, I don't know where we got it. We went, Brussels, France, traveled around a bit in France, and there we got sick.
Wow.
So that's for me, is like, fuck, I'm staying home.
Wow. And hopefully it was okay with vaccination and all that. Okay.
Absolutely. If compared to other horror stories, it was absolutely mild. And I do ascribe that to our vaccinations.
Okay.
because I have had a little bit asthma, so I was afraid, that it would hit me.
I do too. Yeah.
Badly, but it wasn't. It was like a flu. It is a flu, and it didn't hit me badly. Although I do ascribe that to the benefits of having had the vaccines.
Okay.
But for us, it was so funny in a way that we become daredevils when everything is supposedly over, and that's when you get it. It's
the
like
thing.
It's like a film noir, or has this sort of moralistic thing. The bad guy, he turns good, redeemed by love, and then the cops get him.
Oh yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
Or not. One second, my dog's wiling out.
Yeah.
He gets separation anxiety if he's not in the same room with me.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it may be something like, at least in the U.S., particularly Los Angeles, where I used to live, there was the thing that happened with AIDS. It's like I grew up watching people all around me die of AIDS and HIV, and then. But everyone, like younger people, never had that experience. Like they never had that reference point of seeing somebody with, sarcoma and all of this. And so younger people just stopped taking precautions and being very risky in their behavior. And also for younger people, they just assume it's like, well, it's not, they don't think of HIV as a death sentence anymore. It's like, well, now there's drugs, you can manage it. You never hear about it on the news, it seems very much. And so that may be the same case with COVID. People are like, well, now there's vaccines, there's Paxlovid or whatever that is. It's just like, well, who cares? That can produce a new epidemic. I mean, like in Los Angeles 10 years ago, there was a massive, like medieval level outbreak of syphilis and gonorrhea because of people meeting on dating apps.
Right.
And it's just like these diseases have completely come back that you think people would have the most basic common sense to be able to avoid. But, that's how people are. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So that's
totally. And my hope then is that for some people at least, it can become a little bit of an afterburner in a good way, like that people keep thinking about these things and actually change things on existential levels and become more mindful about what's what and what's important. And I think one of the interesting things here, Swedes in general, they're very keen to go out in nature. I think that's true for all of Scandinavia. And of course, we only have 10 million people in a pretty big country. So there's a lot of space here, and it's basically all forest.
That's great.
It's all nature. No, it's wonderful. So I think that in Sweden, a lot of people started going out into nature more because that meant not having to meet other people. It's just like drift in the forest or go on a hike, whatever. It's good for your health, good for your body and mind, and good to reconnect with nature. And so those I see also as benefits of this thing that they would probably not have done unless they felt so confined being inside their little apartments or houses. And nature is just out there. So let's go out into nature and see what happens there. And it's fresh air and nice, and you come back home and you sleep better, and it's just healthier. So that's like one result that was very good here. But I hope for also, the people in general, whether it's this pandemic or other things that are happening, or even the war going on in Ukraine, that people start connecting the dots and saying that these are circular movements. Everything comes back to bite us in the butt. The dictators are interchangeable, but they always end up in the same way, and it's not good for them. And apparently, when you go to dictator school, they rarely teach history, it seems, because anyone with even a superficial knowledge of history, like for instance 20th century history, not that far ago, is like it all ended very badly for all these autocrats and tyrants in different forms. So what is it that makes them think that they will end up differently? It's psychosis. They are psychotic, and they have lost touch with that kind of reality check mentality. They are high. They are riding high from being in power. Power
or
corrupts.
from drugs, literally, in many cases.
I'm sure. I'm sure that too. But the main drug is the most dangerous one is the thrill that comes from dominating other people.
Yeah.
And that you should only really do when you are fully individuated. But none of these people are. So that's why it unfortunately ends really badly for them. Or I should say fortunately, but unfortunately also for a lot of other people. And it's a fucking shame.
Right. Although maybe they're very well aware of that, and it's the devil's bargain that's worth it for them to have that type of power. I can certainly understand that. Yeah, and certainly we've been subjected to extremely supremely authoritarian currents in Western culture for the last, I've lost track now, well, for a long time, but particularly since 2016 or 2015, not just in terms of autocrats, but in terms of people, including a lot of people in a culture adopting more authoritarian mindsets and trying that out. And it seems like that's maybe on the wane now, but it's hard to tell where things are going to go next.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think in general, I like, usually when you say people are grasping for straws, it's usually a very negative image, in the sense that there's not much to cling to, and if you're in quicksand, you will surely, fall down. And if you're in the water, and, you can't cling to straws, it's too fickle in a way. However, I do find the image quite beautiful, the human being sort of grasping for, clinging to some kind of connection with the earth, with nature. I mean, that's not the moral meaning of that saying, but I like the image. So we're all, I think, clinging for straws, not only in the sense that we are all, mortal and that kind of basic stuff, but as human species, I think we're obviously clinging for straws, because whatever it is that's being done is usually done under the aegis or the umbrella of business. Yeah, let's build some electric cars with better batteries, but that sort of depletes another mine somewhere else.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, okay, so no carbon emissions, but still, there'll be gaping holes in Africa, more of them, and so it's problematic. I think that maybe we should not cling for straws. We should probably cling for trees or something instead. And
it made me think of I Ching yarrow stalks clinging for straws.
No, absolutely. And also made an image in my head when I said, cling for the trees. That for me was always, or has always been, the way to travel to the overworld in the shamanic journey. It's always been up through a tree and then up into the overworld. So yeah, I think just basically people need to become more aware of nature. And by that, I mean outer nature as one organism in which they're a part, but also of their inner nature. There's really no difference in between them, but our inner nature is easier to get in touch with, because all we have to do basically is temporarily shut off the sensory input, close your eyes, be still, meditate basically, and see what comes up. Or go into an active ritual, like on a guided path working or whatever.
Yeah. Certainly lockdown was kind of forced that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about some more of the essays in the book, because there's so much territory here. I feel like each one of these could be each obviously chapter could be a huge conversation, but you touch on Jajouka, Derek Jarman, The Prisoner, which I love, Ezra Pound, Austin Spare. There's a ton here.
Yeah, I know.
And so I'll just pick one out. Magical realism. I was super interested in your thoughts about this, if you wanted to talk about that, because I've been thinking about that also recently, just in terms of the magical realist literary genre and film genre. And I was just I recently watched a film called El Norte from 1982, which was a magical realist film, which is great. It's a Criterion Collection one, I think. It was a film, a magical realist film about people fleeing violence in Guatemala and attempting to immigrate into the U.S. illegally, and then getting here and trying to navigate the culture, but full of magical realist symbolism and dreams. And it struck me while I was watching this movie, magical realism actually probably is the best way to depict and describe the magical experience to people. And it kind of is what magic feels like when you're in that slipstream.
Absolutely, and also perhaps reality as such, because reality is not a straight narrative. Weird things happen in real life also, but I think that our minds or psyches, whatever, have a tendency to smoothen things out in order to function. Maybe that's a defense mechanism in a way, because if we were to accept all the absurdities and weirdnesses that we encounter each day, then maybe that would affect our capacity to navigate in a rational way. I don't know. But what my take on this was that, yes, we all love magical realism as a genre. You mentioned movies, and of course the literature, a lot of it coming from South America, but that's neither here nor there. That's a term that depicts a certain kind of cultural output, which we love. But I was interested in that. Why does it affect us, or I would say, why does it affect me so much? And maybe that's then generally valid for more people than me. And I found that what it is, it's not completely crazy. It's not a fairy tale with everything topsy-turvy and, turn things upside down and, things like that, which I think will appeal more to children. No, there are slight distortions of an almost hallucinogenic kind that, within the confines of a traditional straight narrative, if you have a little distortion there, then you react because you're not used to it. What the fuck was that? What's happening here? So basically that activates the reading experience and also the reader's experience. That is something that I like a lot. I find it incredibly magical because it can be used for like a Zen thing, like a Zen koan that is seems irrational, mystified, a riddle at first. But when you get it, it is like, that slap of that stick of the teacher when you fall asleep. It's like, it's a brutal awakening. You go, whoa, what's this? And I think that can be, it is needed in our pretty sedate lifestyles. And that I think also can have negative effects, because in the essay, I talk about magical realism, but I also talk about, real magic, just twisting it and seeing that a lot of what commercial advertising and, of course, fake news and all these things are doing is that they're using one form that we are accustomed to as meaning something specific, but they distort it in a way that we either understand or don't understand. And the problem is when we don't understand it, then it becomes propaganda. We swallow it without chewing. And in the essay, I talk a little bit about the aesthetics of truth in a way. For instance, if we have been imprinted during this past decade or so by when we see footage that obviously comes from a cell phone, we interpret that as truth. Because that's how we've been taught to look at it in the news. It's like, it's a revolt in Northern Africa, or it's here's the dictator being killed, or here are the American cops beating up someone. So we're inherently programmed to believe that this shaky handheld thing, it displays the truth. However, it's so easy to fake that too, and you just shoot something, whatever, with a mobile phone, and then send that to a news network saying this is this. And when people watch it, they will go, "Oh, wow, that's amazing," or "That's so sad," or whatever. However, we're also programmed to believe that if something is super streamlined, well lit, beautiful scenography, doll-like actors, then we know it's fiction. We're programmed to believe that this what we're watching or partaking of is fiction. So there's something to be said for the form, how things are presented. And that's why magical realism in the good way, in the literary way, is very interesting. And it also goes for film also, that with slight deviations, we can understand how sucked in to media we actually are. And it'll be the little deviations or what's between the lines that will actually tell the real story, because it has some kind of meta level of the storytelling, not only the story told. And I think that taking part of that culture is very beneficial, because it makes you aware of the fact that someone has actually put this together. So it's a little bit of a meta magic.
I love it. I'm super interested in your experience with the Jajouka, because this sounded like an extremely colorful experience when I didn't realize that you'd been to see them.
Yeah. No, it's just incredible. It was literally beyond belief. Because of the fact that I also write about there, I'd been immersed in the mythos, for all of my, and not even, I was going to say my magical life, but I mean, even from day one, literally, because my father used to run a jazz club in Stockholm in the mid-60s. And right when I had been born, there was a buzz at their door, and Ornette Coleman came to give me my cradle. And it sounds like
that's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. Tell me about it. It's, the hand that rocks the cradle, etc. So already there, I had some kind of Jajouka connection. It just hadn't happened yet, because Ornette Coleman went there with Burroughs and recorded one album, and Burroughs recorded at the same time, etc., etc. And then you have Geisin, and then you have the Beats there in Tangiers, and you have Brian Jones presents the Pipes of Pan that I used a lot as ritual music in the Topi days, for instance. And it's just incredible, and also magic, of course, the Mektubian magic that I've practiced for many decades now. Basically writing spells. It is written, Mektub, that Geisin and Burroughs integrated in their magical mythology in a way. So for me and Vanessa to be there physically in Jajouka during summer solstice celebration and be blasted by this music that in my mind was mythical, but now it was also real. It was imaginary growing up and listening to it, but now it was real. And those transcendences are absolutely like initiations. And it's not like, going to see your favorite band. It can have the same thing, but this is much more, because it's connected to such a long time unbroken tradition of this Lupercalia celebration, where you have Bujilud, this Pan figure, coming in the goat skin and whipping the women and also kids and stuff. It's just completely timeless experience of something that's been going on for thousands of years. It's all over the Mediterranean. They were doing these Lupercalia celebrations, and the goat that's slaughtered, that Bujilud dresses in, that's something you all eat together. That's the banquet, the feast, right before the band starts playing again. They just play and play and play, and you cannot not dance. It's just incredible. It's like the complete ultimate cosmic rave. And all the other aspects. It's just beyond belief.
Wow. Some of the other cultural figures you chose in the book, was there a common thread? Since we can't touch on all of them, although I love to, was there a common thread with the ones that you picked, and was there a kind of overall pattern of what you were trying to show?
Yeah, I think the common thread is that I love to go on tangents. I love to speculate about occulture and all these things. And now also in source magic, there's a lot of what I call magical anthropology, a bit more like overviews of how it relates to human culture. But there's also a lot of me in there, because I never wanted to be dry or academic, because let them do that. I want to be I am the story in a way, in that I'm a little bit of a navigator or a protagonist. Sometimes I'm not really present, sometimes I am. So I think the red thread is this sliding in and out of my own psyche in a way. I can that what you talked about before here with us going to Jajouka, that was of course very, very personal. So that's a protagonist story. Whereas, for instance, another essay about the British TV series The Prisoner is much more of a cultural essay about that TV series. However, as we both know, it contains so much that is relevant for the occulture of our times.
The Prisoner.
Yeah, The Prisoner, the individualism, paranoia, control, how do we liberate ourselves, who can you trust, etc., etc. And that goes for, the essay about Derek Jarman too. It's something that is very close to my own mythology, but that's more a piece about his relationship to magic. So, yeah, I guess magic is the red thread.
Yeah, the prison. All these are so things that I love as well. A lot of them, at least. And I was thinking, it's like so many of these things for me, at least, have been such an obvious part of a culture. I mean, certainly being around Jen. Jen was very connected to Derek Jarman and Jajouka and all of these things, Austin Spare. But these are, again, perhaps occulted names. I mean, certainly in the US, I don't think people really know who Derek Jarman was now. They do in England, but maybe not as much. And even The Prisoner is not something you hear people talk about. But that's such an important document. I always love I'm not a number, I'm a free man. But I actually like better than that. They do a riff on that in Batman Returns, where the Penguin says, "I'm not a man, I am an animal." Which I think that's good.
yeah. No, but I think if there's anything, over kind of a strategy or a premise for the book as such, I mean, it's an anthology of essays and lectures and things that I've written over these past years. But if I do love to contextualize things. Sometimes I feel that I find new things. Sometimes I feel that I perhaps rehash or at least recontextualize things that at least I know and a few others. But as you say, there's an entirely new generation that have heard of these things or that have not heard of these things. And for those people, I feel a need to contextualize and present and represent and perhaps even represent these spirits in a way, because it is magic. It is the magic of occulture. It's the occult stuff. It's the culture stuff, and then the occulture stuff, and then there's the stuff that's sort of in between, in what I call the occulturation process. Things that are moving from one to the other, and I like to I love to look at these things and just write about them and contextualize.
Do you see that as a two-way process? I'm thinking, obviously things from the occult tend to move into culture, but they also go back and even things that are just kind of forgotten as time goes on become occult.
And I think that the interesting thing there is not necessarily that they become occult in the sense hidden, but that they become magical in the sense empowering for the magician. And I think I suspect there are a lot of things going on in the new technology. Last time we touched briefly upon AI, and I think that, and also things like TikTok and this sort of stuff that I cannot really relate to because it's so distant from me in its psychology and usage. However, I'm sure there's a very savvy new generation of magicians who are aware intuitively or intellectually or even historically about how these dynamics work, and they're using them. So in that sense, everything that's out there in the mainstream, take TikTok as an example, for instance, it cannot be more mainstream than that. Yet it has esoteric magical potential because it's a select little group that can use the technology to achieve their own ends. And it's not necessarily bad and brainwashing. It could also be empowering and creating new communities and stuff. Like that was the idea at the beginning of the internet, for instance, and with,
Right.
as we know, cyber culture. So I think that in that sense, things are going also from the mainstream and into the occult, but not in the sense to be hidden or forgotten, but in the sense of empowering magic. Whereas I think in terms of the old occult stuff, there's still more to dig up and out.
Oh, always
move into the mainstream.
And I think any of these in your book that people picked up on, any of these are capable of changing somebody's life, whether it's The Prisoner or Jajouka or Derek Jarman. There are whole universes to discover.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's great. I like, of course, the Swedish word smorgasbord, as we say, smorgasbord.
That's better.
It sort of means that you have all kinds of plates of nice, wonderful tasting stuff. Everything might not be to your liking, but it's all good quality stuff, and you nibble here, you nibble there, and you'll have a great time. That's how I look at it. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely how this book is, and so maybe we should wrap on that and let people read it. So, Source Magic: The Origin of Art, Science, and Culture. It's a again, I will ask you to say, I will say smorgasbord, but you'll say it much better than I would.
Smorgasbord.
There we go. That is what it is. Thank you, Carl. I'm hyper conscious of my American barbarianism. It's a great book. People should definitely pick it up. What are you working on? What are you working on next?
I'm knee deep in something that is due to be ready within a couple of months, and it's a very, very interesting book for me, and hopefully for other people also. It's a magical autobiography. So I've been going through like 50 volumes of diaries from 1987, plus finally sorting my archive now that I have a bit more space here, and going through correspondences, just very rare stuff. I don't mean it rare in terms of financial value, but rare in the sense that how many people way back when actually printed out emails? I did.
Jen did as well. Jen was always printing emails out. Yeah.
And I'm so happy. And I even have old photocopies of faxes, because faxes, they just, disappeared. They evaporated. And things like that. And of course, just saving letters and correspondences and all little documents and photographs, of course. So I'm in the midst, knee deep, of my own memory mosaic in a way. And it's very, very interesting because, of course, this documentation that I have allows me to remember more than my brain can cope with, because I've forgotten so many of these things, but those stories are all in the diaries. So I'm sort of revealing to myself and eventually to the readers also what the hell was happening.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Will it be an autohagiography?
Well, I'm not so sure about the hagiography. Let's call it something auto. My first association to auto is, of course, erotic, autoerotic, but it will be that too, but in an intellectual way.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to talk when that comes out. That sounds great.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you for doing a 2-part conversation. That was, I think, very, very. The first one was well received, and I'm sure this one will be as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Jason. Okay. And also in terms of ultra culture, you remember I always used to sign letters and stuff with the I was going to say the Roman salute. I don't mean that, but the Catholic Church always said "Vade retro" to keep Satan at the distance when they were threatened by a demon or a foxy lady or whatever. So I always signed my letters "Vade ultra," which means come forward. So
I love that.
We should just say "Vade ultra culture."
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I love that. All right. I must have seen that in some of because I've seen that before. So it must have been in some of the Topi in the archives. Letters from you.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, Carl.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you next time. Okay. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.